Welcome. Happy Friday, everyone. My name is Tyler Pate. I'm a art director, graphic designer, illustrator, and today for Adobe Pro Tip, I'm going to be showing you guys how to do the blend tool. A couple different features I think is worth sharing and also just to make your life a little easier in Adobe Illustrator. So let's go ahead and dive in and we can go ahead and discuss these. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss is kind of where you could take these different tools. And one of these in particular is when using the blend tool, there's many different ways of repeating shapes or repeating lines and patterns and even gradients and colors that can kind of come from just one feature. So here is a little fun thing that I put together a while back using primarily the blend tool. So you'll see this nice little waffle here, and I'll do a quick overview real quick so we get to see what the possibilities are, and then we'll dive into each one individually because there's a couple different routes to choose from. Love to really stand this. So with this gradient here, we could use the blend tool to mimic and consistently have color flow through each color tone. So each one of these would be a single color. We can input gradients there. We could also adjust and create three-dimensional type. It's kind of another fun way of introducing 3D type with the blend tool. And then finally, we're gonna go into how do we outline these shapes so that they're not just a blend tool feature or filter, so to speak. It'll be more so an outline like you see here. So let's dive into the first thing. Using the blend tool is relatively simple. If I wanted to dissect this illustration here, you'll notice that there's a lot of repeating shapes. Usually these squares and everything in perspective and overlapping areas are actually using the blend tool. So let's recreate this in a simple line. So if I was to start with the stroke, let's go ahead and change the color here to something like this. Actually, let's just go ahead and mimic exactly what we did with the Eggo waffle here. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that same line, and what we're going to start to see here is if we highlight both of these, what we're going to be using is this tool right here. If you hover over, this is called the blend tool. So there's a couple ways that we could use that effectively. If you use the key command, which is while both of those shapes are highlighted, you could do Command, Option, and B, and that's going to essentially create a blend of that same shape repeating throughout those two areas. Looks like craziness right now or a solid shape, but what it actually did was repeat a couple times. So if you actually keep this selected and double click on the blend option, you're going to get this little box right here that's going to give you some options. So what I like to do is specify distance, and then whenever you see this increment, you can adjust this. And it's going to consistently put that shape throughout those two waypoints at equal distances. So this is where it comes in handy, especially whenever you're doing a lot of these duplicating shapes or repeating patterns or other objects. A lot of times it just helps to use these blend tools rather than repeating that same object again or recreating it over and over. So I like to do this. Let's go ahead and set our distance to, let's do 0.5. And you can also drag that blended shape, and it's going to continue to use that increment that we've already set at the beginning. So I can make this as large as I want, and it's just going to keep adding lines to it because that was the shapes that we built on. So how do we get to the Eggo here? If I was to then change the perspective of this using the transformation tool, I'm now going to start to think about each of these lines in the waffle. So let's go ahead and duplicate that. Do Command C, Command F, and that's going to paste that into place. And now we're going to start getting that waffle cone. Just like that. And once you start putting a couple of clipping masks on this, you're going to start to see the waffle really come out. Just like this. That right there is exactly how this shape right here was made. And if you wanted to take this further, I could drag this, duplicate the same shape, and make sure that it's underneath that clipping mask. You see how I have two shapes here? I'm going to change the color of these strokes. And it's very simple to do. It's just like a live stroke at that point. You could see the original shapes that we built here. And I'm going to darken these just a little bit. And now that's going to give this illusion of perspective in a 3D object. And then you just continue to repeat this over and over until you've built each layer of this waffle here. Just like that. So that was a very quick and fast way of showing how I was able to use the blend tool just to create illustrations such as this waffle right here. And again, we were able to do that in a couple seconds. And if you scale back and let's do outline mode, you're going to see the actual shapes that are involved. There's actually just a couple strokes here, and the blend tool is filling in the areas in between. Just like that. And then I was able to really bring them all together with a clipping mask. And I think that's the key there of using a couple different features at once. So that's how you could use the blend tool to illustrate repeating shapes and almost patterns to kind of give it what you need for depending on the illustration that you're trying to go after. But let's say if you wanted to bring in color for that, and there's a lot of fun ways of introducing color with the blend tool. And the first thing that I think of is something fun like this endless gradient triangle here. And this is a very simple shape. If we did outline mode, we're only seeing about 3 different circles. And these circles are just solid colors. So if I was to create that again, I'm going to create 1 yellow, 1 blue, and then 1 red, just like that. And with all 3 of those shapes highlighted, we're going to go ahead and do Command Option B, which is the blend tool. And it's going to start connecting those shapes, you see. And there's a little bit of trickery that I'm doing with this one. So in order to get them to connect, we're going to have to repeat this same process. So I'm going to copy these 2 shapes again. And then I'm going to Command F, and that's pasting in place. And I'm going to do the blend tool again. Command Option B. And then there you see, it seems like this continuous gradient going throughout this shape. And it almost gives this look of 3D, which is a really fun thing to accomplish without using the 3D tool itself. And you could do this in all sorts of shapes. And again, you could also drag these shapes, again, to see what we're doing in outline mode. We're just moving these shapes around. But the blend tool is able to really connect these shapes in almost a 3D-like area. And if we wanted to edit this, again, we can make sure that we select that object that we're making adjustments to, and then double click on the blend tool feature right there. And you'll see this dialog box is going to come back up, and then we're going to switch down to specific distance, and then we can change the distance. So if we were to limit that distance, it's going to show each of the individual shapes. It's only whenever we add the distance to a very small increment that it almost seems to be a seamless shape. So it's kind of an optical illusion. Kind of a fun feature to play around with. And I think what's really interesting is whenever you start connecting different shapes like this, you'll see that there's this continuous line that runs through the center of all those shapes. If you were to use your direct select tool, click on one of those shapes and you're going to start to see your handles appear. And this comes in handy for adjusting that curve and that stroke that's kind of going through there. And the only way that you can see this line is if you have the entire object selected. If you only have one selected, you're not going to see those handles in order to adjust them. But if you select the whole shape itself, then you can kind of get in there and move things around. And this comes in handy. Let's say if you wanted to kind of move this around, you can kind of connect those shapes again. And you see that the distance is still spaced out a little too much. So let's say if we double click on the blend option again, and let's adjust the spacing between, and we can make it look more like a consecutive gradient stroke, which is pretty fun. It's almost like a centipede. So let's try this again. Let's say we have a different shape. Let's say we have a square like this, and then we want it to morph to a different color. Let's say this yellow, and let's have it morph to a slightly darker, almost a golden color. Let's see, maybe let's switch these around. Now we can have a nice gradient from those, going from red to yellow. Command Option B is then gonna, again, it did something funny here, which it jumped to the piece on the end here, rather than going in a row, you see? And I wanted to show you that because what that actually did was it only will connect the shapes based on when they were created. So you need to create all your shapes in a certain order in order for them to connect in the right order like that. And again, you can get in here and use your handles to adjust. Let's say we wanted to make this a little darker. You could change all the colors. So you still have complete ability to edit these shapes even after you've started to adjust them, which is pretty nice. But you'll notice the further you stretch these out, the more you're going to start to see the individual squares that are involved, because it's just repeating that shape over and over. And if you did want to go back and reduce that distance, simple as double clicking that, bring up your distance panel, and then make the change or adjustment there. So the last thing I wanted to show was how to use the blend tool in a way that you can then have those raw repeated shapes throughout that blend. Because again, if we circled back to these earlier examples, you notice that it's only showing the shapes that we originally created, and it's not showing all the ones in between. So how do we show those? And this type example would be great for it. So you can apply this to type as well. So here's an example I did. Trust the process. If we wanted to recreate this, let's go ahead and put our type right there. And we're going to blend it to this darker color. Same type, just a darker color. Select both of those, Command Option B. And then we're going to double click on the blend option, specific distance. And now it's repeating that type throughout both of those original type treatments. And then you can kind of have fun adjusting the distance between. It's faking this three-dimensional look that you could get through the effects panel. And you can move these types around, and it still repeats those shapes throughout. So what I like to do sometimes is whenever I create custom type where I'm repeating and making this three-dimensional look, I'll typically do this, and then I'll grab this first type treatment here, copy, and then paste into place on top, and then I'll change that color just a little bit. Gives it a nice dramatic look. And I can change that distance by just dragging that type. That's a fun color. And if you throw a background color behind that, and that's just from using the blend tool. And the blend tool, again, if we did Command Y so that we could see exactly what vector shapes are in front of us, you'll see that we just have about 2, 3 of the same type treatments there. And then the blend tool's doing all the rest. So let's say we want to make this into actual vector shape. So if you ever explored outline mode or exploring the option, you could do path, and then you can do either outline stroke, or you could either do expand or expand appearance, which is a really fun feature to use. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. I'm going to do Command Option O, which is going to outline my text first. And with my text now a shape, I'm going to outline the blend itself. And if you do Option, Expand. And Expand is going to give you the option of expanding the object or the field. And what we have here is it's a blend fill. So if we click OK, now you see that the shape has gotten a lot more complex, because each one of those repeated shapes throughout that blend is now a shape that you can adjust, you can edit, you can move, you can kind of do anything you want to, which is pretty nice if you want more control over what you're creating. This is kind of an up-close look of seeing what the blend was able to turn into. Each one of these is a repeated shape of the original. And there's other ways of doing that too. And this, again, this is just with type. And the blend tool, outlining it, again, that's kind of what we just did. But what I wanted to show again was, let's say you had a circle here. We're gonna kind of repeat what we did earlier. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that into a blend. I'm gonna reduce the spacing between my blend. Let's say something like that. So it almost appears seamless. I'm going to then select that entire object that's blended. Go up to my object drop down, and then we're gonna go to expand. And then when we expand it, just like the type treatment, just make sure that both of these are checked and then click OK. And let's see what happened. So it looks like a solid shape, but really it's just hundreds of the same shape repeated over and over. That gives that illusion that it is a solid gradient, which is pretty fun. And typically I like to reduce that to a single shape. So there's so many complexities and points that are involved right here. Sometimes it helps to just merge those down, and then it'll also speed up your process a little bit more too. Because the more points and the more shapes you have on your screen, it's gonna lag your computer just a little bit. So by reducing those, you're able to then free up the space and memory and work a little faster. This might actually take a while to process. Exactly what I was saying. So it takes so long for all those shapes to just get merged into one. I'm just gonna go ahead and cancel that. So just an overview. The blend tool can really come in handy whenever you're duplicating a lot of shapes within a certain path. You're trying to make those objects appear repeated and consistent with spacing, just like how I did for the waffle here. These are all strokes, and you can easily outline those if we wanted to, like we did before. Just expand. And now we have all of those lines that we can move and adjust. And then we talked about gradients. So how we could use those same repeated shapes in a gradient to then give this illusion of either something that's 3D or something that, that's kind of cool too. We could even twist it. Or even this effect that we can apply to many different shapes or type treatments, or even a logo. You could use this pretty easily to give this illusion of perspective. Go ahead and adjust these curves. We can change the colors here. Just a really fun way to play with different gradients. And then we showed examples of how you can apply that to type as well. And this is probably where I use the blend mode the most, is with type and just expanding different three-dimensional looking shapes. This actually turned out really fun. Love the colors in this one. If you wanted to heighten this a bit more, you could even add a stroke to this. Give it a little more dimension to it. And if you did outline mode, that kind of shows you all the individual repeated shapes that are throughout. Perfect. So I hope you were able to pick up a couple different features of the blend tool that maybe you didn't know, or maybe something else that you could even expand on. I think there's a lot of different opportunities with the blend tool in general whenever it comes to color and these shapes that we talked about repeating. Again, it just speeds up your process, especially if you're working with complex shapes or patterns. I'm constantly using the blend tool and keeping it live too. I don't always outline them or expand those shapes because it can slow the computer down, like I showed before. But it's a really great place to start for those gradients and those different type treatments that you could have fun with. So if you can, join me over on the Discord, and I'll be there answering any sort of questions or other comments on any of the things that we discussed, or any other design stuff that you might have some questions about. It's great. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.